Excellent. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Take a moment to get settled. We'll begin momentarily. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome, welcome. Excellent. So let us begin. Bonjour tout le monde, and hello again, everyone. Great to see everybody joining us here today. It's great to be back speaking with our growing CAAM ecosystem. We'd like to set the space before we launch into some of our conversations today in order to connect us all here. And we've got a quick warm-up question that we wanted to start off in just bringing us together in this digital space. So in our question and answer function, please take a moment and pop into the chat for everyone to see. This is going to be our check-in question for today. So as we approach the end of the year and the holiday travel season starts to pick up, what we want to hear is imagine how an advanced air mobility solution could transform your holiday experience in the future. Share with us one city in the world where you think AAM could make your holiday travels easier and more enjoyable in the future. Let's get some of those connections flowing. Excellent. Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate it. Just seeing that pop up there. Oh, great to have you here as well, Jeannie. Appreciate it. Good insight, Dale. That New York or even some of the Australia side with Melbourne. Yeah. Powerful. Okay. Venice on the Italy side. Excellent. Thank you all for taking some time there. So let's dive in. First of all, thank you for joining our quarterly CAAM Town Hall, your first stop shop for advanced air mobility updates on operations, policy, and regulations for advanced air mobility in Canada. We know that this digital event is taking place on the traditional ancestral territories of the countless First Nations across Canada. And as settlers, we recognize our duty and responsibility towards reconciliation and the equitable and inclusive use of our future air resources. In this spirit, we'd like to share and promote the artwork by Kuting Creations, shown here in our slides, which leads the Bead Your Province Map initiative. This is featuring designs by Indigenous artists from across Turtle Island here in Canada. So for our agenda today, as for initial introductions, my name is J.R. Hammond. I'm privileged to serve as our Executive Director for Canadian Advanced Air Mobility, our federal industry association for advanced air mobility in Canada. In conjunction with our co-founders of the National Research Council of Canada, we also have our CAAM team of Marketing Manager David Dong and our Chief of Staff Theo Robson supporting us today behind the scenes. Each of our town halls will feature our key updates in the field of advanced air mobility from our national authorities of both Transport Canada and NAV Canada as we progress towards operations across our country. The focus of today's agenda is CAAM's role in creating a consistent and recurring space for the challenges and regulatory updates from CAAM and our national authorities en route to these operations in Canada. Then we'll transition our conversation to the Transport Canada segment, where we will welcome special guest Christina Grabill from the FAA on the timely update of the Special Federal Aviation Regulation, or more commonly known as the SFAR. Lastly, we'll conclude with the NAV Canada segment, featuring Alan Chapman, Kirsten Dawson, and Jonathan Bagg, providing the insights on corridors and concepts, airspace design principles and plans. For today's audience engagement, similar to before, we invite our attendees to submit their questions via the question and answer function in our Microsoft Town Hall event. And this will allow our CAAM team members to make sure that we respond and follow up with these questions either in today's discussion or any detailed questions that might need further conversation offline. So we are grateful that this CAAM Town Hall is powered by the support of YEG and Edmonton International Airport. Not only has Edmonton been an immense champion of AAM technology Canada to date, but their recent drone and RPAS developments are driving that operationalization of AAM and the Golden Star status across our country. We want to make sure that if you have powerful stories or experience to share in the advanced air mobility space, please connect with us. We need these platforms and we need these stories to be shared as we continue to build that innovative community together on route to operations. Now, as a review, our international community and CAAM is expanding our definition of advanced air mobility to be more in line with what we're seeing along the ICAO standards. Specifically for us at CAAM, advanced air mobility is really that definition of the evolving air transportation system enabled by three main pillars: new propulsion systems, new aircraft architecture, and new operating missions. All of these culminate together to allow our people, goods, and services to move more effectively and efficiently within our urban, regional, and remote areas. To give some of the insight of what this looks like in terms of operating missions in Canada, we focus on all the developments coming out of the RPAS sector that is currently flying today, the example of Indra Robotics in British Columbia, which began some of their commercial ops in 2016. This is then supportive of the growing marketplace of retrofitting of existing aircraft, such as the Harbour Air Electric E-Beaver, that had their initial test flight back in 2019. Similarly, we progress into the aviation training sector for our future pilots, having seen some of the commercial flights by Sealand's Pipistrel Velis Electro, the fully electric trainer aircraft that flew initially in June of 2024. This then allows us to move into that future technology on the expanding vertical takeoff and landing, short takeoff and landing, and conventional takeoff and landing, seen here by some examples of our entry to service partner Beta with their ALIA 250, which we're looking at about a 2028 timeframe in Canada for their partnership with Helijet. And then these pillars help support some of the new technologies coming on with both the autonomous electric vertical takeoff and landing, such as the Wisk Gen 6 aircraft, about a 2030 plus timeframe. And then, of course, the larger market that we're looking at on the commercial aviation side with the Airbus Zero E side, around that 2035 plus timeframe. The important piece to note is that no singular aircraft will serve all missions and use cases in Canada, and CAAM is working under this greater AAM umbrella to ensure all ecosystem members are participating and preparing for these future operations, no matter where they occur. And similar as shared from before, we know this work cannot be done in silo. Our role in Canada is to continue to bring our AAM development globally and nationally, represented with our leading international organizations here in our partnership and the growing Canadian aerospace ecosystem as they find their role in unlocking the future of AAM for their members and, of course, ecosystem constituents. But for us at CAAM internally, we really look to the guidance of our national board. These are the strategic innovators, both leading in Canada and providing us guidance on where we need to move Canada as a whole forward, starting from the National Research Council, CAE, Beta Technologies, Unither Bioelectronics, Air Canada, and of course, Helijet. The national board is at the top of our CAAM ecosystem, providing that strategic guidance. And then we structure the rest of our ecosystem based upon our membership side of the advisory committee, our leading project partners, our engaged ecosystem to make sure we're sharing good news stories across the country, and then our general ecosystem as well. Our project partners are some of the leading innovative organizations across the world that help play the role of our CAAM operating pillars, which show the progression of the advanced air mobility ecosystem in Canada. Our project partners typically start off in the top right-hand corner, leading into that thought leadership of what is the potential of this new entrant into the AAM ecosystem, and then moves through our operating pillars through Ecosystem Builder, Project Catalyzer, our national strategy team giving insight and guidance on our federal level, participating and amplifying their great work on their annual event, and helping to build our future workforce under the diversity, equity, and inclusion pillar as well. Now, we need to highlight the important work that is occurring in Canada at the moment, where we have our National Advanced Air Mobility Integration Team bringing our National CAA of Transport Canada, our ANSP of NAV Canada, and the Industry Voice of CAAM together on a quarterly basis to discuss those opportunities, concerns, and challenges en route to AAM integration across our country. This is also served purposefully with our letter to both the Minister of Transport Canada and Minister of INSAT on a quarterly basis, where our CAAM members have a chance to voice their good news stories, the asks and concerns en route to our highest levels on the federal aspect of Canada's AAM development. As we conclude for our industry update since we last gathered, we need to make sure that we have a simplified list of all the great work, but some of the highlights we wanted to share with the ecosystem was the INSAT's $101 million investment of their inaugural launch of funding 5 innovative projects across 6 provinces, showcasing our national participation and collaboration in the Sustainable Aviation Technology Fund. So we wanted to make sure we highlighted both the materials project by Pratt & Whitney Canada and DRL, the hydrogen fuel cell stack development project from Ballard Power Systems, H2M, Duxian E-Jet grounds testing with Tronos as well, the electrification with Harbour Air and Elevate Aviation, and of course, the additional hydrogen project from Pratt & Whitney and Next Hydrogen Solutions. Please take a look at some of our social media to follow up on some of these specific projects. We continue to help support both the AAM aspect of INSAT and our partnership in the future funding announcements coming soon. Now, on the note of funding, we know that the eVTOL industry stands at a critical crossroads right now. Innovation is often clashing with that harsher economic reality of what is commonly known as that trough of disillusionment. Lilium's recent journey perfectly captures what this tension has shown. On one hand, we have a company that's announced exciting partnerships in the past to advance both the letters of intent and, of course, the flight data opportunities, showcasing what Lilium has in collaboration on a global sense. Yet days later, at some of their events in Nevada, Lilium filed for our first self-administration bankruptcy, which is a harsh reminder of these financial pressures currently plaguing even the most visionary players. This is a sign of some of the major turbulent times our industry has ahead. But at the same time, and what's not receiving enough air news at what we wanted to amplify is that while this trough of disillusionment is real, we see additional investments coming into our major players, expediting their progress towards certification and operations. This is demonstrated by some of the news over this past quarter by both Joby and Beta. This isn't just a story of struggle, it's that story of resilience. These challenges on the path to commercial operations, while daunting, are driving the industry to adapt faster. And this is where we wanted to hammer down that during this operationalization pathway, which we know is not easy, the challenges ahead will be significant and will demand that resilience and adaptability and a clear focus on how to scale from entry to service to commercial operations, both on the regulatory and market demand side. This urgency is what we're setting up as CAAM as the pathway to these operations and how we want to play a leading role in being your partner for navigating AAM in Canada. Let us be that trusted partner in showcasing what are the opportunities and how we can continue to help bridge that trough of disillusionment en route to operations in our country, and of course, taking a leading role globally. One of those aspects that we wanted to share and bring additional awareness to is the starting of leaning in with some of these majors with our Canadian delegation heading to California in January of 2025. We're grateful to have a trip going down to visit both Wisk, Joby, Archer, and NASA's Ames Research Center at the end of January time, where we have funding available for up to 50% for for-profit Canadian companies. And our CAAM team will post more information to express your interest in joining us on this delegation trip. This is an opportunity to continue to lean in on some of the great work that we're doing both nationally and ensure we're connected with the business opportunities on some of our leading OEMs globally as well. So with that, that's our formal update from the CAAM side. I'm now going to transition over to our Transport Canada segment, where we're grateful to have our timely updates from our guest, Christina Grabill from the FAA, for the timely update on that special federal aviation regulation, or the SFAR. So Christina, we'll welcome you up to the stage. Thank you for taking some time here today to provide your insight and showcase the great work the FAA has been doing and the impact that we know this is going to have on the development on route to operations here in Canada. So I will pass it off to you, Christina. The floor is yours, and thank you once again for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Really excited to be here and present on our agency's a lot of hard work that we've been doing to implement this new technology. So just to get a few basic questions out of the way, why rulemaking? What's in the final rule? Where can you find the final rule? This different regulatory entities have different regulatory structures, and we're all faced with unique challenges as regulators on implementing this new technology. Simply put, our Code of Federal Regulations really didn't fully enable this new category of aircraft prior to recent rulemakings that the FAA has initiated. This rulemaking, in addition to the ones that we have completed, really implement a full comprehensive regulatory approach that ensures operators, OEMs of powered lift do not encounter regulatory barriers during their entry into service. Prior to the final rule I'm going to speak about today, we actually only had pilot certification requirements on the books. We largely didn't have operating rules. This wasn't really enabled. In 1997, we had a different set of aircraft in front of us as well. So the V-22 Osprey, the 609 was coming online. We had a lot bigger transport category, larger aircraft in front of us. We didn't have the new technology that we're seeing today. So most notably, this rulemaking provides additional pathways for adding a powered lift category rating to a pilot certificate. It also provides for the safe integration of powered lift into our operating rule structure. A big example of this is obviously powered lift is an aircraft. When we had an operating rule that detailed an aircraft must do XYZ, obviously powered lift had to comply. But for example, fuel reserves only stipulate airplane and helicopter requirements in our United States regulations. So by default, powered lift did not have to comply. So we really had to do a top-down approach in making sure that we implemented this new technology within our own country's United States federal regulatory structure. What is in the final rule? You hear a lot of talk about the SFAR, Special Federal Aviation Regulation. We also have multiple permanent amendments that are updated to our Code of Federal Regulations. Our SFAR is valid for a period of 10 years. And in the short term, this allows these operators to most quickly get up and running. You know, as soon as we finalize this, they're off to the races. In the long term, we expect to gather a lot of information through the way we've implemented the SFAR and be able to inform a permanent regulatory structure in the future. And SFAR does expire. So that's what we mean when we say it's valid for a period of 10 years. The SFAR provides additional options for adding a powered lift category certificate in addition to what we had codified in 1997, which is also still available. So what we have on the books is still there, plus some new alternate frameworks that we've implemented. And most notably, in the United States, we go through rulemaking. We have a proposal, we have a public comment period, and then we have a final rule, which is what we're talking about today. A change that we made from the proposal to the final rule is that we're also introducing a new framework for flight training and certification of pilots in a powered lift that is equipped with a single flight control. Currently today, you are required to have dual flight controls. So that is a big change from the proposal. It also contains changes to the current operating rules based on the powered lift's unique capabilities. We also incorporated some performance-based approaches to certain operating rules, also based upon the comments that we received in the proposal. Other miscellaneous changes, when I say it was comprehensive, it was comprehensive. Pilot record database, maintenance requirements, definitions, anything that we could do to really make sure we most completely implemented this new category into our regulatory structure. Where to find the rule? I have a link included in this slide, and I wanted to take a brief minute to talk about our regulatory structure here in the United States. We have approximately 50 titles, from anything in aeronautics and space, like the FAA is under, to wildlife, fish and game, postal services. So it's all within our Code of Federal Regulations. The FAA falls under Title 14, Chapter 1. We have 199 parts, which are essentially, larger topics of regulatory requirements. The FAA published our final rule on November 21st. So it is officially live on the regulatory regulations.gov website in the link provided. Our administrator signed the rule on October 22nd in its final form. And that really met a lot of our reauthorization obligations that we had here in the United States. So the rule will be effective and live on the website in the left side of this slide in the end of January. So there's a 60-day effective period whenever the FAA implements a new regulatory requirement. Like I said, there are multiple permanent changes as well as an SFAR located or contained within this final rulemaking. They're updated throughout these various parts, and most notably an SFAR. When we implement these, we have a little bit different regulatory text structure. We were excited to be able to make a new Part 194. That means our regulatory text is much easier to look at, and it is what our industry regulated entities are used to looking at via the old SFAR regulatory structure, which has kind of antiquated indents, numbering, and is a little bit hard to follow. So we were excited to be able to do that. Once it does go effective, you'll see it in subchapter L on the left. And this is ecfr.gov. This is where the rule is right now in the Federal Register link. So as I mentioned, there are many permanent amendments. Each box represents a part or one of those bigger topics I mentioned. Part 1, definitions of abbreviations. Part 11, rulemaking, exemptions. 43 is a lot of our maintenance requirements. Part 60 is our simulator qualification part. Part 61 is our pilot certification. This is our big one. You can see we made a lot of changes here. Part 91 is our general operating rules. Aircraft that are not being operated as a commercial operator are always required to comply with Part 91. Part 97 are instrument procedures. Part 111, pilot record database, like I said. Part 135, many permanent amendments here in our commercial operating rules. Part 136 is our part that dictates air tours. 141 is pilot schools, and 142 is our training centers, our CAE, flight safety, those entities. Now, like I said, we implemented a new subchapter, Part 194. The SFAR's number is 120, but any kind of regulatory text you see will be 194.xx. This is encompassing pilot certification and training, as well as operating requirements. And you can see we are also touching multiple parts with the SFAR. Most notably, this is where our pilot certification requirements are, where our operating rule tables are going to be located. And any other kind of nuanced items are in the SFAR related to those two topics. So, as a brief overview of the pilot certification topic, as I said, the current requirements detailed in Part 61 are still available. They're a little bit harder to meet because we only have a base of pilots, approximately 760 pilots in the United States that hold a powered lift category rating. This is commercial and flight instructor certificates. So obviously that's not enough. And the alternate frameworks are really geared towards making sure we can build a base of pilots very quickly. Those alternate pilot certification pathways allow for alternate requirements for logging and experience. And we're doing that through commercial operators under Part 135, pilot schools under 141, and training centers under 142. This allows us to have monitoring of those training programs, things that are approved in the normal way. the FAA is used to dealing with. That way we can monitor and inform that 10-year approach I was talking about previously. Additionally, that single flight control powered lift training is located within Appendix A to Part 194. The changes for pilot certification regarding Parts 142, which was our pilot schools, and 141 pilot schools, and 142 is our training centers. There are normal pilot certification mechanisms that we have here in the United States. We made largely administrative changes, making sure that training course outlines could be approved with this new aircraft, that the personnel requirements matched what was required. The biggest change that we made in terms of pilot certification is the flexibility to enable this very broad initial cadre pilot certification through approved training programs under Part 135. Normally, Part 135 operator is doing commercial operations, helicopter, ambulance, carrying passengers. They're not a pilot certification mechanism normally. We've given them an avenue in the SFAR to qualify pilots that are already employed with their operator through the training program that they would have and approved with the FAA. They can receive those base certificates. This is normally done at the type rating level at the highest, and we don't do it at the powered lift category, you know, that base pilot certificate level. So a lot of flexibility there. And normally you have that building block method where you have an instructor at the airport with the aircraft in this SFAR. We're just trying to recognize the reverse, you know, taking those very experienced operators, OEMs at the top, and taking advantage of their operational experience to start that initial cadre. So that's really what's driving a lot of our pilot certification requirements. Let's see here. I will touch on the single flight control, additional 3 options that we have thrown out there because there's always a lot of interest around this. The first option that we are recognizing is when there is a single flight control and 2 pilot stations. This option is allowing for an applicant and instructor to flight train in the aircraft as normal, in making sure that the flight control is instantly accessible by both the applicant and the instructor. The flight control itself must meet the certification standards from both pilot stations, able to reach everything, you know, it has to be a flight control. And then the instructor still has to determine that the flight can be made safely. In our second option, this is where we spent a lot of time, a lot of effort going through basically outlining a cadence of training. So this is very largely driven by the public's comments. And we have outlined in option 2, when you have a single flight control and 1 pilot station, allowing them to, again, comply with this cadence and this order of training in order to gain their certificates, starting with ground training, doing their simulator training in a level C or higher. They would end that simulator training with a mock practical test for all of their certificates and ratings. Then they would jump to the aircraft with their flight instructor. The flight instructor demonstrates all the maneuvers required for those certificates in the aircraft. The applicant then demonstrates the maneuvers to their flight instructor to know that they can be endorsed to safely operate that aircraft. And then they're going to go out and get experience in the aircraft during solo operations. The applicant would return to the practical test in a simulator. And then if they don't have a certain amount of experience, be required to conduct supervised operating experience, much how we have, you know, the type rating. If it's conducted all in this simulator, there is an element of SOE if you don't have a certain level of experience today for other aircraft. And the third option, this is just an anticipation of, you know, we know this technology is innovative and we wanted to be forward thinking on making sure we can absorb that new advancement in technology. Our third option is a deviation authority for this. And it is basically allowing for training in the aircraft, full flight training in the aircraft with a single flight control and a single pilot station. If there is a system that we see that can absorb that safety intent of the dual flight control requirement. So the certificate holder has to demonstrate that the person providing training and the PIC observing can take immediate corrective action in full control of the powered lift. The flight training and SOE has to be conducted effectively in that powered lift, and the administrator determines that the safety would not be adversely affected during that training. So those are our big changes in terms of pilot certification from the proposal. Jumping to operating rules for powered lift. Like I said, the FAA has initiated rulemakings that are allowing the powered lift to be a commercial operator. That was done by a previous rulemaking to this one. So now they can operate where they couldn't before. And that kind of put us at a status quo situation where, again, if something was required for aircraft, powered lift would obviously have to comply. But if it was only a requirement for airplanes or helicopters, then they would have not had to comply by default. Our SFAR regulatory text geared towards the operating requirements are organized in a table format, and this is for ease of reading and ease of use. You'll see 3 columns in these tables. The first is going to be the source operating requirement. The middle column is going to be whatever the powered lift has to comply with. And the third column is going to have any nuanced items that the powered lift would need to accomplish. This is also where a lot of our performance-based requirements are located, in that third column next to the source regulation. For example, fuel reserves under Part 135, if they're able to determine predetermined routes, predetermined landing areas, they can go below that fuel reserve requirement even. Approved through our normal operating specifications that we have here in the United States. That's how we authorize operations of an operator. So that's an example of one of those performance-based requirements that we have located throughout the SFAR. One topic to bring up is we had to really look at all of our operating rules from the top down. You know, what's the safety intent behind it? Why did we codify this in the past? What drove it? Accidents, you know, anything. So we really had to do that. I know not a lot of regulatory agencies are doing the same thing. We looked at subpart L of Part 135, and that's our helicopter air ambulance subpart. If a powered lift chooses to do air ambulance operations, they meet the same safety intent for us implementing that subpart. So they would be required to comply with subpart L of Part 135. It also contains some different requirements to powered lift air ambulance. An example of that is we have an operational control center requirement in the United States for if you have 10 helicopters, then you would have to have an operational control center. Well, that's, again, something we're looking at as regulators. Well, if you have a combination of powered lift and helicopter, it's going to kick in that same operational control center requirement. So that's just a brief example. The operating rules, like I said, are under these main tables. I haven't talked a lot about the Part 197 table. This is our instrument procedures part. By definition, we had a barrier. They are not a helicopter. They're very clearly defined as a powered lift in our regulatory structure. So they were precluded from using a copter procedure, which we definitely wanted to enable that, especially if they're able to comply with that procedure. Obviously, they can use any other standard instrument procedure if they're able to comply with these copter procedures as well. They are enabled to do so through the SFAR. So, but again, largely the same approach. We're looking at all of these parts to make sure that operators utilizing a powered lift under those respective parts are most fully enabled. And that is about the last slide that I have. I can turn it over back to you, JR, for any questions.
Well, thank you, Christina, for just taking some time and giving us that overview. And I know we're going to have some questions coming in as well from our audience, but let's just start off. Over this past quarter, when the FAA announced and signed in the SFAR, What has been the reaction from industry in this reverberating, I know, across literally around the globe? What has it been for yourself and the team on receiving some of the insight after it was signed in?
That's a good question. It was really awesome to see through our rollout and Office of Communications. It was exciting to see the positive feedback that we received this time from the
Mm.
proposal. So very complimentary. And again, the team and myself, this has been our life for the last 3 years. We were excited to hear that positive feedback. So
Powerful. And I know you have some of the FAA team here supporting you as well, so we'll make sure that we can invite them up on stage for some of these questions and answers as necessary. But I think the most important one, and what our ecosystem in Canada is eager to hear about, is this cross-border collaboration. Given that Canada is also on our pathway towards AAM operations, how do you see, from the FAA point of view, this SFAR influencing or having an impact on our regulatory alignment and that synergy between Canada and the US?
yeah, definitely. And we were definitely considering that throughout the preamble. We foresee a lot of the bilateral agreement structure that we have to accommodate a lot of those differences and communicate on those. So that's most enabled through that, as well as, if you have a certificated aircraft with a standard airworthiness certificate, that's a big step forward
Hmm.
within that collaboration. So.
And I think diving into some of that, maybe this is too nitpicky, but we know our Canadian side has unique challenges on both the icing, of course, winter ops as well. Has there
Mhm.
been any talk about, be it under the single flight controls or the powered lift operating rules as well, how these new aspects, or let's say the northern part of the US, will be impacted as well with these unique weather concerns?
Well, I think that the operators or the manufacturers are having to consider that when they're doing their designs. Obviously, battery power and cold. Again, I went to college in North Dakota, so I know how that goes. They definitely uh, are going to be incorporating that within their certification projects. So it'll be interesting to see what they have as far as new technology in that regard. But
And then paint us a picture, Christina. We've talked about our importance, yes, on the United States side, yes, on the Canada. Where do you see this on the global aspect? Have you been contacted or reached out to from some of our other major players, be it on the European side, Eastern
mm.
Asia, or Australia, New Zealand aspect?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess mostly we interact with ICAO, is a big thing. I know there's a conference actually right now that I've just received a few communications about this morning, and just making sure that we're harmonizing across the board. I think there's a huge effort of, making sure from start to finish, we're at the starting line, making
Yeah.
sure expectations are very clear uh, for especially, between us, EASA, the UK, making sure that, what we do for certification and how that translates is a very big conversation. Uh, we had an advisory circular published to try and make sure we're aligning our certification projects and making that process easier. So I think us as an agency, we're definitely having those conversations and excited to collaborate to make sure there is that harmonization for the European countries between, them and us. So.
And thank you for bringing up the importance of that harmonization aspect on the ICAO framework. We're privileged here in Canada to have ICAO as our United Nations of Civil Aviation. I'm bringing the world to Canada to help do that challenging work. And I think this is a great opportunity to leverage the SFAR as some of the spearheading opportunities of saying, this is our first step. We're still at the starting gates, and we want to continue to expand upon there as well. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
I similar wanted to build upon what we're looking. I know we have some questions coming in. So Marilyn Pearson from CAE was giving some of that insight on the instrument rating, type rating, etc. How are you seeing that in the conversations with EASA right now, which is taking a little bit of a different approach?
So with the instrument rating and the type ratings, ICAO requires a type rating. EASA is requiring that VTOL capable aircraft in a type rating. So a lot of those, they also have different regulatory structures where they can maybe determine in their operational suitability. That has a lot more regulatory weight behind it than we do in the FAA in the United States. So a lot of those things we expect to come out with our AFS 100 division when they're going through certification. We also, in the similar way, look at those training differences, how to effectively conduct training from type to type in the way that EASA does, and just kind of matching up a lot of those findings, I think is going to be key. But again, we don't have the regulatory requirements behind our flight standardization board reports that maybe the OSD does over in EASA. But I think we're going to find a lot of similar value in, training points that we discover through those similar policy projects, I guess.
And I think the important part, as we build upon the pilot training side, which was a massive aspect of the SFAR. In Canada, we're taking that approach of preparing for the next wave of skilled pilots entering this AAM workforce. What are you seeing as some of the initial takeaways from the SFAR in terms of the training and what specific skills pilots might need or get excited about coming into this new industry as a result of giving some guidance on those new standards?
A lot of the flexibilities that we give in the SFAR is recognizing that a commercial pilot has a certain level of experience already, and whether they're coming from an airplane background or a helicopter background, they have different valuable experience. So a helicopter pilot is going to have that off-airport confined area operation experience, whereas they might not have the circling approach experience like an airplane pilot would. So we definitely discuss that in the preamble and why that base commercial pilot certificate provides us with an experienced pilot that is doing an add-on powered lift rating. That's what we tied a lot of our flexibilities to, because they're already going to have quite a bit of knowledge operating within our regulatory, national airspaces. So that was an interesting conversation and one I really liked having in the preamble. So.
And yeah, I want to make sure our Canadian operators and of course OEMs hear that as well. Opportunities to take that existing experience and of course amplify it into this new industry as it builds out too. And I know what you glazed over as well, Christina, is all of those challenges and conversations you and the FAA team had to go through in getting to introducing this regulation. Can you just give us a little insight of some of the major hurdles that were needed to overcome to bring some consensus and get us to the starting gates for this next 10-year sprint?
Our biggest, our biggest hurdle, I would say, pilot certification, operating rules, why we're focusing on it a lot in our presentation. That single flight control, dual flight control conversation was very hard to have. But, we definitely rolled our sleeves up and we're really digging into all of the reasons why we had those regulations and why we feel like this final rule is still going to provide that equivalent level of safety, considering pilot experience of folks that are going to be utilizing it, considering what we have as far as this new technology. And that was definitely a difficult conversation, but I'm excited where we landed, and it seems like industry is pretty happy with it as well. The operating requirements, we proposed a lot more conservative approach. Now, we've discussed this in the preamble. We've taken that approach in the past. When we incorporated helicopters into the instrument environment, we applied the airplane requirements and then shifted to, paring those down. We went with the helicopter requirements as well as really leaning into what commenters were saying about performance-based options, trying to make sure we really did that wherever we absolutely possibly could. So those were some two more difficult conversations, but I'm really excited to see the industry's response to that. So
yeah, and I just want to make sure we're not undermining the massive amount of work that went through to getting to some of those overcoming some of those conversations for taking that starting piece. So just wanted to focus on that. And we know on the Canadian side where we're seeing these opportunities expand across a variety of different both training aspects, operating side, and then bringing in new energy technologies where our hydrogen economy continues to grow and be at the front and center of our Canadian developments as well. We invite these additional challenges to continue to be a part of that conversation, knowing that's going to increase the potency of the industry too. And just as
Absolutely.
we come up to the top here, Christina, we have to leave off on a kind of our two favorite questions as well. Where do you see the opportunities that have unlocked as a result of the SFAR coming into our system?
The opportunities, I think that, it really is endless now that we've codified this new regulation. I'm just excited to see what the industry specifically makes of it. This technology is evolving so quickly that they're envisioning things, maybe we didn't envision. So
Hmm.
uh, I'm excited to see where the industry takes it. I'm not quite sure how to answer it, I guess, on a personal level, but
You've set some good pathways, so I think the span of it is quite large on there as well.
mhm.
And our last one here, Christina, just from the Canadian perspective, what would be one call out, knowing that we're going to be working with our CAA Transport Canada here for processing all this great work as well? What is one call out or ask that you could have from the Canadian ecosystem to continue to champion as a result of this good work?
Hmm. I don't know. Just keep the lines of communications open. I think that my favorite conversations that I've had during the process of rulemaking is meeting with other regulatory entities. And, just I don't know if the most comforting thing is knowing we have similar issues to fix, but it makes you feel like you're not alone as a regulatory agency or regulator, and knowing that you have a lot of these similar problems to fix. So yeah, just keeping those lines of communication open, I think, will be key, which I think that our agencies are pretty good at. So
There we go. Noted on doubling down on that existing and expanded communication side, be it via the ICAO aspect, be it our North and South collaboration. So that call is out there. Christina, on behalf of all of us at the AAM ecosystem across Canada, thank you and the entire team from the FAA for the time today, for giving us some of that insight. And we'll make sure we continue to amplify the good work and find those partnerships between Canada and the US to expand.
awesome. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. So as we conclude and transition to our next piece, we wanted to make sure that we continue to thank all of the work that's going on south of the border, showcasing where Christina and of course the FAA team continues to champion this side and how that's going to have a role for our future operations here in Canada. For our second piece of the conversation, we wanted to make sure we expanded upon our air navigation service provider side, so our NAV Canada segment, and we'll make sure that we can bring and conclude our section today with welcoming Alan Chapman, Kirsten Dawson, Jonathan Bagg, on providing a timely insight on a topic that we know is expanding across Canada and showcasing on some of those international sides too, our corridors and concepts, how we lean into this airspace design principles and plans. So with that, I wanted to make sure we could start off with bringing Alan Chapman, our Director of RPAS Traffic Management at NAV Canada, up to the stage. Alan, on behalf of all of us, thank you again for being here and creating this space for NAV Canada, and we're excited to support on the conversation ahead. And just
Thanks, JR.
checking.
It's great to join you. Great to join you on the call today. Thanks to CAAM, to you, JR, and the team behind this for organising this forum once again and really allowing us to keep the regular drumbeat of communication going as we move through this. So really appreciate it as always. So what we wanted to talk about today is a very important topic of airspace. If I just give me a moment to reset my design. Great. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we want to talk about airspace with everybody today, and the title of this one is Corridors and Concepts. I'm really pleased that we've been able to bring to the table two people who are critical to these efforts in Canada. So first of all, Kirsten Dawson. Kirsten started her career as a tower and en route specialist. Since then, she's held a number of leadership roles across NAV Canada and is now part of the team and accountable for our airspace modernization, specifically leading our airspace development team. She brings all her experience from those previous roles into that and looking at how we move forward efficiently and effectively with airspace as a national resource for Canada. So really pleased that Kirsten's able to join us on this call today. And also Jonathan Bagg. Jonathan in our stakeholder group, also a long history inside NAV Canada, really been a key partner on many of the advanced initiatives as we look at things like urban air mobility, advanced air mobility, and kind of going back to the first strategy pieces on RPAS as well. So Jonathan's been a great partner in much of this work as he works across the many segments of NAV Canada. So really pleased Jonathan's able to join us as we walk through these topics as well today. So we're going to cover off a little bit, just briefly intro to why we're having this conversation, and the topic of corridors comes up a lot when we're in the new entrant space. So we'll be touching on kind of what those requests look like and why this is relevant. Kirsten will take us through some of the airspace design concepts that we use today and some of the things that we're thinking about. We'll talk about level of service. So that's how the process works. How do we actually make changes for our airspace to service all the users across the piece? And then I'll finish off with some points around how we're thinking about the concepts for RPAS and integration into the very low level airspace and some of the volumes that we may bring forward as we implement new technologies for that. So to start off, when we talk about corridor requests, as I say, we get lots of different kinds of requests that come in from different initiatives that are driving forward in Canada. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar with this, NAV CANADA is the organisation that has the responsibility to manage the airspace, and that means we have the responsibility to both plan and manage it. And that was granted to NAV CANADA when we were set up as a not-for-profit organisation under something called CANSCA, which is that act that's shown in the top left-hand corner there. And we know the importance of airspace design. It's a critical resource for the country. It's a resource that has to serve all types of aviation, from general aviation to commercial, or including D&D, and also all the new entrants that are coming in. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the initiatives that are underway to kind of help us do that. But as I say, we get these requests for corridors that come into often come from new entrants, be urban air mobility or others, to try and get some way that they can service the operations and missions that they want to fly. And so we kind of have to take a step back and kind of walk through what we actually do today, how we keep fair and equitable access to the airspace for all users, how we manage that process, and if we do think about bringing changes in, how we execute on those changes through the level of service process. So that's some of the topics that we'll talk about as we move through this today. So I'm going to hand off, first of all, to Kirsten to take us through some of the airspace design concepts.
All right, thank you very much, Alan. Hello, everybody. So I lead the airspace development team here at NAV CANADA, and our primary responsibility is really to set the standards for airspace design and make sure that those standards are adhered to. As you know, Canada's domestic airspace is a very large volume of airspace, and that's divided laterally and vertically into unique sections of airspace that we assign to various control units. So those units have sole jurisdiction over these unique volumes of airspace. So that's how it works in terms of how we parcel up the airspace and assign it. Of course, we will always have a job here because there are always advancements in communications, navigations, and surveillance capabilities. So that keeps us on our toes. The airspace is always changing, albeit very slowly, because it's a long, rigorous process. But all that to say, with emerging technologies, both on the ground and in the air, we're constantly monitoring the airspace, and we always see opportunities and really needs for changes in airspace design. Next slide, please. So Alan mentioned the Airspace Modernization Initiative. This is one of NAV CANADA's top 3 strategic initiatives. So our team is very, very involved in both the strategy part of this and also the tactical projects that really line up to how we see the future design of our airspace. So this is really a holistic redesign of all of Canada's national domestic airspace. And why are we doing this? Many reasons. First of all, to better account for customer needs and preferences. So technologies are always advancing and evolving, and we need to keep up and make sure that as a service provider, we are offering the best opportunities to our customers and stakeholders. to better improve the flow of traffic and to support demand capacity balancing. This is something that we're seeing around the globe. I think Eurocontrol is a really great example of how they've come together and really looked at this network approach to support demand capacity balancing. And we're working and we're full speed ahead on that initiative at NAV Canada as well. To enable technologies such as space-based ADS-B. So we recently rolled out a mandate for Class A and Class B airspace, and a significant change being able to have, basically full surveillance capabilities across the landscape. And we need to take advantage of that. And again, to enable the fundamental shift to 4-dimensional trajectory-based management. So trajectory-based operations are not just a buzzword, it's something that we need to make happen to best manage the airspace and look at it as a network or a system rather than a collective of individual airspace volumes. Next slide, please. So our team really looked at guidance from ICAO and Eurocontrol in terms of airspace planning. And as we approach this design and development process, we're really looking at what we're calling the golden rules. So the first is that it's the flight paths that guide the development of airspace volumes. Not only what dispatchers and airlines want, but we're also looking at what they actually end up flying. So it's the filed versus actual, and we're looking at both of those things. So the IFR route structure and controlled airspace is based on predominant flows of traffic, and we have data and analytics that we can look at to help us see those trends in our airspace, whether they're cross-border routes, oceanic routes, polar routes, or the short hauls that go up to our northern communities and back. So those are all of the things that first guide us as we look at the redesign. Second, ATC boundaries are developed according to these predominant traffic flows. So I spoke earlier about those unique volumes of airspace. So these are the volumes of airspace that are assigned to individual controllers, and they make up a specialty of people that are trained on that same airspace. So we need to make sure that a lot of thought goes into how those airspace boundaries are constructed. So the IFR route structure should not be designed to fit into pre-existing specialties or sectors. So what I mean by that is, let's design the airspace around the routes and not the opposite, where we just kind of fit the routes around something that's already there. The third is controlled airspace should exist where it is required. If you look at the maps now, they're relatively unchanged in terms of the division between controlled airspace and uncontrolled airspace, as they have been for years and years and years. And as we have evolved in communications, navigation, surveillance, we need to take a closer look on where that green airspace is now and if it needs to be changed. And of course, any change to classification, Jonathan will talk about a little bit more. That's a very rigorous process, but something that our team does is has a look at what would make sense. And then if we go through, if we decide that we need a change, then we go through that very prescriptive process. So controlled airspace is established where there is demand rather than where it has historically been established. So looking forward to seeing some changes there as we evolve in this. Another thing I'll say is that as we look at the airspace design, we need to consider, of course, efficiency and the environmental impact from our stakeholders. And one of the things that's top of mind for us is the energy management from the aircraft itself. So we want to make sure that we are considering things like continuous climb operations, continuous descent operations, so that we can structure the airspace as best we can so that that energy management piece can be realized. All right, next slide, please. So in order to really modernize the airspace, we're looking at several concepts: free route airspace, flexible use airspace, airspace sharing, things like that. One of the things that we're really focusing on right now is flex use airspace. So book what you need, fly what you book. And we have this tremendous opportunity right now in Canada because of our acquisition of our F-35 fleet. And this is an aircraft that needs a lot more airspace to conduct training exercises. It's a long-range aircraft, and the airspace that we have assigned to this now is just frankly not going to be big enough. So this is a great test case for us. So, and it's not just for the F-35. So with increasing air traffic density combined with new demands for current and emerging military capabilities, we need to find a better way to manage this airspace. And like I said, military, potentially civil airspace users as well. So this gives us opportunities for much more efficient airspace utilization. Right now we have fixed boundaries, and frankly, that does lead to underutilized airspace. Very often this is, assigned to the military, but we may not see many airplanes or any airplanes operating with the airspace. However, commercial traffic still has to route around. So this results in higher operational costs for them, unnecessary delays, and increased workload and complexity for our controllers because, they have this red airspace in the middle of their screen and they have to route aircraft either above it or around it. This will add a lot of flexibility for everyone in the system. So the rigid structure we have now restricts any kind of dynamic allocation based on real-time needs. This is a big switch into how we do things. And once we have it, it'll give us a lot more efficiency and operational efficiency. And of course, we need to consider the environmental and economic impact. Really, if they have to file around this airspace, if you think of the increased track miles and the additional workload to route around the airspace. So definitely a different way of operating. But we are coming up with a concept of operations this year, and then we look to future years to really put a pilot project into place. And of course, our level of service team is very involved in this initiative as well. All right, next one, please. So this really showcases some of the important work that we're doing in our team here at NAV Canada. So we have a draft version now of the Airspace Standards and Design Manual, and this really sets the guidance on how we do things here at NAV Canada, how we design airspace, what criteria do we need to consider in the design of various airspace, whether it's high-level airspace, low-level, sequencing specialties, and basically rules for considering things like continuous descent operations, continuous climb operations, and the design of sectors. So we know that we'd have aircraft cross in the airspace, but we want those crosses to occur well inside somebody's jurisdictional airspace boundaries and not at the edge of the boundary, so to speak. So all those things we have prescribed into this document, and this will sort of be our gold standard at NAV Canada for airspace design. I think that's my last slide there, so I'll hand it over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Kirsten. Great. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, of course. And so just to kind of segue to level of service basics. So Kirsten spoke a lot about, the tools and the vision for future airspace, and those tools are what often gets applied through what we call the level of service process. And so when we talk about, some of the tools that we're going to use in the future, whether it be flexible use airspace or controlled airspace, and corridors, things like that, we have a process that we have to use as the air navigation service provider that aligns with the regulator to ensure that we meet requirements and that there's been thorough assessment. So that's what this presentation is about. If you go to the next slide, please. So when we look at level service, so the type of service we offer, we use a process called the Aeronautical study process, and it's used to assess what we call material change. So things that can basically impact users in the system. The key lens on this is first and foremost safety, but we do look at, of course, efficiency and capacity and these other factors, but the safety being the driver. And so when we talk about level of service, it really relates to, as an ANSP, what are the things that we provide to our users or our customers? And that can include the level of air traffic services, whether we have air traffic control or flight information services, surveillance, transponder requirements, so it can touch on mandated equipage on aircraft, hours of the services, nav aids. These are all things that when we change them as an air navigation service, before we turn something on or off, we have to conduct one of these assessments. And really the goal is to have the right service at the right place at the right time to ensure safety and efficiency. And in doing so, meeting regulatory requirements as part of this process. And those requirements come from two key sources. There's a legislative framework, the Aeronautics Act, of course, and then CANSCO, which is the Civil Air Navigation Services Commercialization Act, which Alan referred to at the top of the presentation. That does have certain requirements when we make change in terms of how we notify the minister or his delegated authorities. On the regulatory side, we have to respect CAR Part 8 has some specific requirements when we change service where we have to give notification to the minister on that. So it's a really key, it's really a requirement for us to do these processes. And it's a very in-depth process. If you go to the next slide, I'll speak to that. Basically, this is a very simplified view of our process, but basically it starts with the identification of an opportunity or a problem. So maybe it's a safety requirement. We're seeing incidents occur. Maybe traffic has grown somewhere that we need to really consider. Do we have the right services in place to maintain safety? Kirsten was talking about earlier about, controlled airspace where we require it. If we identify, through her team or through our operations team, that there's another requirement, a requirement to change that space, this is the process we trigger. So to keep the process moving, we develop a terms of reference, which really outlines the scope of the project, of the study. It's lets you know what we're doing and what we're not looking at. That allows us to trigger off outreach and consultation, where we engage all our stakeholders and seek their feedback. And it's really industry focused. It's not a political process. It's a process about understanding, what data, supports a certain type of operation. What are the needs and wants of our customers? How do we enable our employees to provide a great service? It's really empirical in terms of its approach. From there, we conduct various HIRAs and really get into the production of a study, a report, basically. Once that report is completed and we have a set of recommendations, we go to something called the notice of proposal process, where we go back to our stakeholders publicly and say, you know what, we knew there's something we want to assess here. We thought that maybe, we had a thesis about what was needed. Now we've decided we have recommendations. We've done our homework and we believe this is what's needed. This is the service concept that's needed. And that opens up a 60-day comment period where stakeholders can come back and say, that works. Did you think about this? I have an issue with this change. We take that feedback in, basically make tweaks from there if needed, and then submit it to Transport Canada for review. And then basically they issue to us what's called a concurrence letter, basically ministerial authority to proceed with the change. And then from there, we move to implementation planning. There's various notice processes to make sure everybody's aware of the change that's forthcoming. So that in a nutshell is the process. This process, can be quite lengthy. We are obviously a safety-driven organization. We have to get a lot of data behind this, talk to a lot of people, whether it's airports, airlines, even new entrants now, right? So it's really meant to take in a lot of viewpoints and have a consultative process, but one that's really based on data and facts. And so it could take up to a year to do one of these, sometimes longer, sometimes less, really depending on the complexity. So often when we want change, we're really trying to anticipate well ahead of when that change needs to be put in place to make sure that we can do that. Next slide, please. So, just kind of translating that for the stakeholders on this call, what does the level of service process mean? Well, it definitely means that we have a risk assessment process related to underlying ANS services. So as we shift ANS services to accommodate a whole range of new users and opportunities for the Canadian economy and for businesses, we follow a process that's extensive. And considers all airspace users. So that's one of the things that's often, really critical, is that we don't just look at what does a major airline need? What does a flight training unit need? What does an RPAS operation need? We look at it holistically as part of our approach, and really it helps this process leverages existing tools or tools that are emerging to bridge what we have available for tools now to enable a concept of operation to future concepts of operation as well. And finally, integrates with Transport Canada requirements. That's part and parcel of what we do here. So just want to give you a quick overview, and not go over time with the subject, but happy to take answers after I think Alan closes us off. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, and so what we wanted to get to in those two segments really was to give you a sense of what it means for that responsibility of looking after Canadian airspace and kind of the process by which we get there. And where we want to just go now to finish off is one example of that kind of work being executed and taking it from a concept stage. So again, we look after all altitudes, a full volume of Canadian airspace. But when you bring it right down to the RPAS and very low level airspace, we're looking at some concepts here to help get these operations going. And this is kind of also an advert for a concept of operations, which is contained on the NAV CANADA blog site. So if you want more detail on this, go to that blog site, take a look. But just to indicate kind of some of the work we're talking about here, we're talking about so in place today, we have VLOS flights able to fly, and if you're in controlled airspace, you put a permission request in through NAV Drone. Soon we'll be moving, if the regulations continue on the path we believe they're on, as we get to the next release of regulations, that will enable something called low-risk VLOS, which will open up a lot of Canada for these low-risk flights. But then when you get into complex airspace, where you're either in controlled airspace or there's a high population density below you, so it's more risky, we're looking at some additional volumes to help with this work. So one is a cooperative volume where people flying in that airspace actually share their position through some either existing or other technologies, and that's something we're going to be looking at. Great example of that, if you look at Dallas today and the work that's being done under the Mode C Veil, that Mode C Veil gives you that ability to make aircraft cooperative in that volume, and makes the job of keeping aircraft away from RPAS a lot easier, a lot more straightforward. So there's a cooperative volume. There's a non-cooperative volume for when we don't want to put that kind of requirement onto aviation, and how do we spot aircraft that are in those spaces. And then as you look to controlled airspace, in some respects, because we have more technology, more surveillance available in controlled airspace, it's more straightforward, but of course it's busier airspace, it's more complex. So how do we deal with RPAS operations there? We segregate in the initial cases some volumes. That's our thinking right now, and we enable a system to be able to deal with those volumes in that way. And of course, that is cooperative because traditional aviation is being closely tracked in controlled airspace. And finally, we need places to keep RPAS aware, and there's some work that's been done on this recently, and there's more restricted airspace for critical infrastructure in airports going into some of the flight information that's out there right now. So very quick summary of just to indicate again that there's thinking going on for concepts. Those concepts are going to be subject to all of the work that you just saw. How does this fit with our airspace modernization project? How does this fit with our overall airspace design? How do we work with the level of service teams with Jonathan and kind of make these changes happen to bring them into reality? So all of that work has to come together when we look at new concepts and bringing new concepts into aviation like that. I think that's our last slide. So, JR, do you have any questions for us?
Well, first of all, Alan, thank you for that overview. And of course, the insight from Kirsten and Jonathan will bring everyone back up on screen again. I just want to do, as questions are coming in from our audience too, but just to acknowledge the complexities that we've gotten to on our existing processes. Kirsten, I'm going to just highlight those golden rules that you said so eloquently. Jonathan, on that aeronautical study process. Let's just start off for kind of opening up for a discussion here. How, with the degree of safety that we need to maintain, how are we going to find ways for these new corridors, these new entrants, to play a place in a very lengthy process that we know exists for a reason? What does that look like?
So
it's a great question. Yeah,
I
think because I think we all have a part of that answer, to be honest. But thankfully, we're on the same team, right? So yeah, like it's a great question. It's actually a really big question, right? Because it depends. So obviously, I think really understanding as a starting point, like what is the philosophy for integration, right? When we think of early days on how we're going to integrate, it's actually kind of like, through, very clear boundaries. So it's kind of like a form of integration, as I say, through segregation, right? Like keeping the operation separate. The long-term vision for a lot of our initiatives as an organization is how do we achieve a true greater level of integration, right? So for us, it becomes a big question, and the answer to that question is what are the tools we're going to implement, whether it's the classes of airspace, the determination of corridors, a lot of the capabilities that I know that you've been discussing with Alan a lot, and then the actualizing it goes through our level of service process. So there's a lot to that question, but maybe I should actually pass that to Alan, because I think you're really well suited on the global perspective.
Yeah, and also I think that's spot on, Jonathan, what you just said there. And again, when we get sort of requests that come in and say we need a corridor, we kind of have to go back to first principles of what for? What do you mean by a corridor? What are you trying to do? And Jonathan showed on his first chart, it's like the first job is always what's the opportunity or the problem that we're actually facing, and figuring that out. Working recently with Kirsten and her team and with our air traffic standards teams, we looked at the sort of inbound sort of eVTOL and powerlift and some of those aircraft that we anticipate seeing early in this process. And actually, one of our conclusions was we can service those today with our existing ATS service, with our existing airspace design, in the volumes we're going to start with at least, and we can treat them as helicopters. So there are things that we can do today to support the early introduction of some of the new technologies with very small changes. There'll be some procedural changes, or there may be some other small changes, but there's no large scale issues or challenges affecting us in those early days of implementation. We believe right now, right? So that's, again, to unfold as we learn more, and we continue down this path, but that's our early take on this. So we're looking at that, and then as time moves forward and we say, okay, these are starting to scale and we're starting to see a more significant uptake of urban air mobility. So now we start to think about airspace design and what are the challenges. And that's, again, when Kirsten's team would be heavily involved in looking at that and thinking about, are the things that we need to do, do we apply the existing tools today? Do we have to think about other tools in the future? And all of that's got to come through the regulator and everywhere else. So we try and, wherever we can, just keep with our existing tool set and use those. But yeah, that's my response. Kirsten, anything else to add to that question?
Well, I think from a safety perspective, we need to consider all aspects of the fact that this is essentially all shared airspace. It is a shared resource, and we need to look at all the activities that might take place within. And and you touched on procedures. There could be different separation standards required, different procedures, along with airspace changes. So any change that happens at NAV Canada, we go through our safety management plan with HIRAs and all sorts of safety activities, and make sure that any risks are addressed, mitigations put in place before we can move forward. So nothing to add much, more than what you two said, but yeah, that's my input.
And if I could just add one last thing there, and I think the good news is there's a lot of good news, of course, across this whole sector. But one of the good news is that we have a process, right? That's in place. So between Kirsten and I on the process side, and you have a real advocate in Alan on the company side too, right? So with the three of us, and obviously the advocacy happening at CAAM to reinforce that, I think we're well positioned to address the change that's needed.
And let's just highlight that existing process, so we're building upon that for these new entrants. I think one of the pieces, and we're just seeing some of the questions come in here, so I'll just pick one for a starting point, but we know the complexity that also exists in those processes too. How does NAV Canada see, and I'm just looking at Nolan's question here, some of those hybrid approaches that are coming out from the FAA or from EASA in conjunction with NAV Canada's vision? Is there alignment? Are we coming towards an agreement? Or are we still working in parallel or diverging paths?
Alan, do you want?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, JR? Sorry, I was just scanning for that question down the list.
No worries. It's on Nolan was asking about the work that the FAA and EASA are doing. Do you see NAV Canada's work going in parallel, coming in harmonization, or are we still on divergent paths?
That's a great question. And again, it depends on the segment and how you look at this. So a lot of our work obviously is coordinated internationally, right? So a lot of our work, we get guidance from ICAO and kind of what happens there, comes down and gets, registered in Canada by the regulator, and we adopt that. There are constant conversations between the FAA and Transport Canada at the regulatory level, for how things are aligning and the bilateral conversations there. And then there's conversations that happen between us and the FAA, from their ATO and our, from us as the ANSP, again, in conversation. In some areas like the RPAS area, for example, we have a lot of work to do to kind of get any kind of harmonization, and there's a working group established to look at that right now. We are looking at how we bring those paths closer together. There are definite challenges there. And as we look to our next generation of RPAS and the concept of operations that's out there, getting a handle on how the FAA are doing that work, how we could envisage cross-border flights happening, is going to be a really important design consideration, so we don't have to retrofit again in the way that we kind of do today, where we don't have that global harmonization. So there's a lot of work to do there, but we are in constant conversation. As Christina mentioned earlier, there's a lot of communication happens between us all to try and get that alignment in the future.
And I know we can expand upon that for a whole nother conversation too, but that importance when we can get to those cross-border operations, we know that's a consistent hot topic across our country, both north and south, of what the economic, environmental, and of course social opportunities are when we can have effective, repeatable, revenue generating operations in these new tech north and south, but still a lot of work ahead. So just as we come to the kind of the top here, we want to have our favorite questions. We'll go in reverse order from starting with Kirsten. Just one ask that you can put out to our Canadian ecosystem for opportunities in engaging in this work going forward. Kirsten, one ask going out to the community here.
I think it's, for my team, we really want to know what people want. What the pilot tells us in the aircraft is not necessarily what the dispatch wanted, or even what the company wanted in terms of a flight profile, and really managing whether it's the cost index or the time index. So for us, it's really knowing, what do the customers want, and then from there it's maybe it's a negotiation, but in the design process, that's really important for myself and my team to know, and for NAV to know.
Excellent. And I know we're going to be diving into that flex airspace comment as well as huge opportunities to build upon. So thanks for sharing that. Jonathan, yourself, ask going out to the industry.
And just one, right? No, I'm just kidding. But definitely no. I think, one thing like observing this industry and something that inspires me to, obviously the innovation is really amazing. But I'm also inspired by the work that's being done on social acceptance, like of the players in this segment. I'd say segment, but like it's so many like so many different opportunities. But the work that's being done on social acceptance, I think, is going to be critical. So for me, it's less an ask because I think a lot of work's already being done, but an encouragement to keep on doing that, to plan. What is our value going to be to communities so that we can deliver this innovation and create all these different use cases and benefit society, but really telling that story and keep on doing that because I think it's going to be really critical as people start seeing more of these aircraft in the sky in the future.
That's it. And we want to make sure that that platform exists for sharing those good news stories because we know they exist. We know they
Yes.
exist. And Alan, feel free to wrap us up.
Thanks. Yeah. I think I'm going to wrap in actually the second part of Nolan's question into my response as well, which is, that's a really good question, right? Do we have the resource and capacity across all the teams to be able to deliver on this? And to Kirsten's point, making sure that we understand fully the needs of industry is really critical, but also understanding the volume of business, the volume of operations that are going to be inherent in the future is a really important topic for us so that we can scale and fund appropriately and understand the sort of the business models that are going to be in place. We're a not-for-profit. We don't look to make profit out of aviation. We look to serve aviation and make sure we keep the sky safe. But to do that, we need to make sure that we've got the right resource and capacity relative to how those segments are growing. So we're going to do some more work on this year to look at the future kind of anticipated growth in the segment, and the more help we can get from industry to understand how it perceives the growth, the opportunity, and the potential here will continue to help us. I know CAAM has an important role to play in helping us see that and helping us understand the vision that you're listening carefully to industry and bringing that forward. So that is my ask before, JR. You may have heard that one before as well, but that's what we're looking at.
We can continue to amplify it. So we'll conclude on that. Kirsten, Jonathan, Alan, thank you again to the entire NAV Canada team for giving this insight. That's the starting point. We have work ahead now, and we'll continue to progress upon that. So appreciate the time and insight here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And just to wrap up for our conversation overall here, we wanted to make sure that we're showcasing once again our Transport Canada segment, where we welcome the incredible Christina from the FAA, our NAV Canada segment here of Alan, Kirsten, and Jonathan. All are valid conversations, and what we wanted to make sure is a consistent aspect for our Canadian Advanced Air Mobility Group as well. So as Alan said, we wanted to make sure that we could provide that space on the CAAM side for industry to advocate and showcase this good work. So always available is our CAAM membership. And some of the benefits are that participative voice on the national side, that facilitated business networking, and some of our priority reservations coming into our CAN Export trip. So we want to make sure that that's available for industry to continue to champion, knowing that the work ahead is going to be there. So we'll conclude today with a thank you to all of our attendees, and of course the opportunity to continue the conversation next year. Here is the availability for our quarterly Advanced Air Mobility Town Hall scheduled for March 27th of 2025 in the new year. And we just wanted to make sure, as we conclude today's session, to bring that focus into a powerful year 2024 and the work we still have ahead in 2025. So from all of us here at CAAM, thank you for taking the time here today. We look forward to engaging in the calendar year to come. Have a happy holidays, and we look forward to the conversations ahead. Take care, everyone.